Hi, welcome to my channel, Readerwoman. My name's Judy, and let's talk books. In particular, books I've read in the month of July. Now, as I've mentioned, I had surgery in the beginning of July, so I really didn't read that much at the beginning of the month. I've found that, when I'm doing downtime like that I actually just normally just watch Netflix and YouTube videos and just kind of while away the time that way. But once I started feeling better in the month, I decided to get reading. And the one book that was on my list that I started but hadn't finished was The Immortal Irishman by Timothy Egan. And the Irish revolutionary who became an American hero. Can I say 2 thumbs up? Now, I do appreciate the prose of Timothy Egan. I read his Big Burn. I thought it was wonderful. I had the opportunity of, it was one of our local Whatcom Reads books this last year, actually this year, 2019. And so it was really great to get to see and hear him in person. Very personable gentleman and very knowledgeable about the history he's writing about. So, so as part of my Amazon Prime, I get to borrow 10 books. So part of the 10 books that I borrowed was The Immortal Irishman and also his book on the Dust Bowl. I've forgotten what that is. But so I started reading this. My only thing about Timothy Egan is he tends to start his books with the end. And I thought with the A Big Burn, it made sense because he was talking about something that was rather unexciting to begin with. History, while it was interesting if you knew the people, talking about Teddy Roosevelt and, see, I can't even remember the other guy he was talking about, but who became the first forestry guy in the U.S. government. And so, sorry. It was a very well-written book. I thoroughly enjoyed it by the end, but he started this book off the same way with the ending. And I think it is something that he probably should dismiss, because basically he starts the book talking about the Irish, to be Irish in Ireland. Now, I know Ireland not that well, actually. My favorite author was James Joyce. And, he chose to be in exile. And while I knew that there has always been a strong movement just to try and get the free Ireland from the English, I didn't understand how far back it went. And Egan went back in history. And so when in the 1600s, when Cromwell came over and basically crushed them, not allowing almost all Irish landowners the rights to their own lands, it kind of made me angry. And then to go on from there, and this is where the book, The Immortal Irishman, is Thomas Francis Meagher. Meagher, M-E-A-G-H-E-R. And he came from a well-to-do family, well-educated. He could have easily just followed in his father's footsteps and said nothing bad about the English and, lived a very comfortable, wealthy life. However, he couldn't do that. And he became part of a group of people while he wrote poetry and articles. His real gift was in speaking, and he could turn audiences into passionate followers. And so the movement to free Ireland from English rule during the Potato Famine in the late 1840s, he was the main speaker for that movement. Just as, you know, it's quite interesting that Oscar Wilde's mother was Sforza. She wrote under a pen name poems that were quite revolutionary. And yeah, so it was quite interesting to see the family bloodline. So Thomas, you know, and to actually read, and Egan does a great job of bringing the potato famine to life, because it wasn't just a famine. It was a famine for one particular food group, the potato. And that is what most of Ireland who had no land rights were subsisting on. They could plant their potatoes and harvest it and have food throughout the year, supplemented by other things. And so when the potatoes just died, rotted and shriveled on the vine, they had no other foodstuffs. Not that Ireland wasn't producing a ton of foods. So he brought that so poignantly to life. And you had these people who already felt that England was unrightfully ruling their land, only to see a quarter of the population, 1 in 4, either dying or being shipped off to Australia, still as a prison, or trying to get on a ship, becoming an indentured servant, or somehow finding the wherewithal to ship over to the US or Canada. So 1 in 4 people, either dead or having to move away. The injustice of this time, the fact that England was growing more than enough food to help feed the starving Irish, and refused, because that was considered their goods. Where you have, you know, one thing that I took great pride in, because it's my heritage, the Choctaw Nation was so horrified, they sent over foodstuffs for the starving in Ireland. You had France sending over food. You had the world going, oh my gosh, what's happening? And there you have Queen Victoria. This is in her and Prince Albert's time, doing nothing. The government doing nothing, more than nothing. They worsened the situation. They were feeding. They had this like soup kitchen, and there was nothing nutritious in the soup. I mean, they weren't actually using real food in the sense of anything with sustenance. So I can only imagine how these young people who already felt that England was unrightfully there, only to see England worsen a terrible situation, because these people who were starving to death in their small little tenant farms, who were starving to death, and so were unable to grow the crop to pay for the land rental, well, sorry folks, you're out. And if you won't get out, we're going to burn down your house. And that's what the sheriffs went around Ireland doing. So just making everything much, 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 much worse. They tried to get a revolt going, and it just didn't happen. And so these young men were caught. They had a terrible guy who was part of the, who joined them, only to tell the English. He turned, you know, he was an infiltrator, and he would give England all the information he had that he was garnishing from his supposed friends. So England took them down, gave them trials. And then when that didn't go the way they wanted, they just gave them, first off, they were all condemned to death. And then after there was such an uproar about that, they decided to go ahead and send them to Van Diemen's Land, the penal colony it's now Tasmania, but the island beside Australia. In some ways, Thomas Meagher reminded me of, he just happened to be in the right place at the right time a lot, or the wrong place, whichever way you want to look at it. But he decided, he made a deal with the warden, and he was allowed into the Tasmanian countryside. He had a small farmstead or something on a lake. I wasn't quite sure how he was supporting himself, but basically he was allowed very small amounts of interaction with the locals. He mainly had to stay by himself, but he did find, he fell in love with a young woman, and they had a child. She went back to Ireland before the baby was born in order to give birth in Ireland, and he ended up escaping. Not before as a code of honor, letting the authorities know that he was planning to take off. So he had people in hot pursuit. Oh my gosh, male stupidity, huh? But I understand, it was the time of duels. Honor was everything. So he let them know. He took off for this huge race for the coast, and he managed to find himself on a boat, and he managed to find himself in New York City, which I understood that America has never been the melting pot that we would wish. But once again, the Irish were found themselves in slums, in poverty, looked down upon, treated as second-class citizens. Meagher rose to the top. His wife, his Australian wife, died, and after a few years, he found himself a new wife. She came from a very well-to-do New York family who hated the fact that their daughter was marrying what they considered below her with an Irishman. But the two of them had a great adventure together. So it was, and then it takes his life in America. He is adored by the Irish, and every time he speaks, it's always standing room only, and people are out the doors just hoping to hear him speak. He truly had a great gift. And then, he was thinking about becoming a lawyer and various things because he needed to support himself and his new wife when the Civil War came along. He did not find himself on the right side of history there. He was not against slavery, but come to find out, some of the escaped Irishmen as part of his band, because they were ultimately pardoned, and most of them found their way to America. One man, though, I've forgotten his name, but he and his sons fought for the South. And the thought was, you have black slaves. You have the Irish is already considered second class. Well, if you were to free the slaves, the Irish and the Black Americans would be fighting for the same jobs. And that was the fear. He also went into great detail about the Know Nothing Party, who basically wanted to make sure no more Irish came to America. You know, which is just, once again, that reminder. America has not been a straight, wonderful, broad, welcoming avenue that we always think it is. So there was a huge amount of distrust, dislike, hatred towards the Irish. But Meagher believed in, he was a Democrat, so he didn't really at first support Abraham Lincoln. However, he felt that I'm not going to fight for the South either. And he rose an army in New York of Irishmen, saying, let's show America what we can do as Irishmen. And they went to war. They lost a lot. He lost a lot of those young Irishmen. And like a year later, when he goes back to try and refill the ranks, he's kind of booed out of the auditorium. The Irish there just see America as wanting to use them as fodder, and without the support or promise of citizenship, etc., etc. That changed. Yeah, the Irish in New York were not pro Abraham Lincoln at all. Quite the opposite. And but he became a general in the Civil War. He was known for staying in place and fighting to the bitter end, no matter the losses. And but his health deteriorated, and you know, he was kind of in and out of the military. He was kind of in a private military to begin with. I wasn't quite sure how that worked, but and then I think he came back as, you know, under the heading of military, but still, because he didn't go to West Point, because of, you know, all of that, he was never considered, even though he was a general, that he wasn't a real guy. Like, you know, I think he and Sherman didn't like each other at all. Sherman just didn't approve. So, so the Civil War ended, and he got a government job out in, let me just double check, I think it was Wyoming. Sorry. I believe it's Wyoming. Might have been Montana. Sorry. Sorry if you're from one of those states. I'm a West Coast girl. Yeah, I think it was Montana. And I'm just trying to read it. Yeah, Montana. Where, once again, he makes a lot of enemies. And they try and, well, when he gets there, the acting governor leaves and it doesn't show his face again. The second acting governor doesn't show his face. And what you have is a vigilante system where a few powerful men decide who's going to live and who's going to die. You know, some of the hangings, I'm sure, were justified, and a lot of them were just political, like, let's get him out of here. So these men didn't like him a bit. And what happened was, you know, he was planning a great future with him and his wife. He was planning on leaving Montana and maybe going on a world tour and with his orating. And instead, the vigilantes hunted him down and murdered him. I think I could say that. I think it was fairly well proved, but not at the time. and he was taking refuge with a friend who had a boat going up and down the river. And I think they probably killed him before throwing him in the river. He was heard calling for help. But yeah, and he was a fascinating man, and I highly recommend this book. Highly recommend it. And really, I think I'm going to read Egan's next book. Will be on the Dust Bowl. So I may just make my way all through his books. I'm really enjoying reading him. I'm a little long on time, sorry about that. But let's go to my next book. That one I got on as my Amazon Prime free book. And let's see here. So it's just come out here in August. And it is a Julia Kidd novel. Let's see here. Relative Fortunes by Marlow, Benn. It was very cute. I liked it. I thought she did a nice job. My biggest complaint, which was the central relationship between Julia and her brother. I didn't quite buy it. I thought she could have done a better job descriptively. You know, it starts off that our heroine is at the mercy of her brother, who is threatening to, he doesn't believe that she deserves half of their father's fortune, is basically it. So that's how it starts off. So she's been living in London and she goes to New York in order to see the lawyers with her brother and see what they believe. You know, instead of fighting it, she just is letting the family lawyers decide. You know, I have to say I shed a tear when this poor woman, you know, lost her fortune because the lawyers went against her. And but there was a lot to like in this, okay? Although, like I said, the brother-sister dynamic, I didn't really buy that much. But the story itself, it talked about the continuing suffrage movement for women's rights in the 20s. It talked about the fact that Julia Kidd was a bookmaker. She had a press and she had type, and as a typesetter myself, I really enjoyed reading about it. And I thought she brought the characters to life. Yeah, and the time period, I thought she did very well. So I recommend it. It just wasn't quite a, you know, for a little, because really I think of these not as a novel, as more of a mystery. So anyways, but nothing to be disappointed in, and highly recommended it. Then my last book was, yes, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but as I was told, there's no shame in reading a Regency romance. And so, since I'd read every other book she's written, I decided to read, let's try it on this other side here, The Rogue to Ruin by Vivienne Lorret. It was fun. It really was. And I needed a little pick-me-up, a little break. It's part of the Misadventures in Matchmaking. Vivienne Lorret likes to write about certain groups, and this was about 3 sisters, and each one of them in each book obviously met their match, although they weren't looking for themselves. And so yeah, it was a fun take, and it was good for a day. when I needed a little pick-me-up. So yeah, that's basically what I read in July. Hopefully August will be more productive. I know I've already started Persuasion by Jane Austen. I'm reading that together with Alba from Seriella. And yeah, and then the other book I'm reading for my book club is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Hadn't read it before, so it should be fun. And we'll see what else I pick up. Anyways, hope you are enjoying your reading life, and let me know what you're reading below. Take care. Bye.